fast. Rum and Coca-Cola.
Good evening, folks, and welcome to KPDP, your home for news and entertainment, here in the heart of the Midwest. It's a brisk December evening, and the wind's howling something fierce, but we've got a story tonight that'll warm your cockles. Yes, sir, just in from the wire, it was a scorcher. Today, all eyes are on the gridiron. Well, and you know where. The Green Bay Packers have traveled to the Big Apple's Polo Grounds Stadium to do battle with the Boston Redskins. That's right, folks. The Packers, led by the legendary Curly Lambeau, and Coach Ray Flaherty's Redskins are meeting to settle who is the top dog in the professional game. We're prepared for reports of bone-jarring tackles and passes that soar like eagles. We'll have a full recap right after word from our sponsor, Wheaties, the breakfast of champions. Stay tuned, folks, and keep that dial tuned to KPDP.
The world was on a brink, but at the Polo Grounds, a different type of storm was brewing. Not of war, but of football. A storm of leather helmets, bone-jarring tackles, and a team hungry for glory. The Packers, who took 3 NFL titles in a row in 1939-31, and the years before the NFL postseason play, had just missed out on participating in the NFL's first 3 championship games a couple of times. Let's review.
If we go back a year to 1932, the Chicago Bears and the Portsmouth Spartans met because they both had unusual records. The Bears were 6-1-6. Portsmouth was 6-1-4. And ties did not count, I think, till 1972. So we eliminated that. And so those were decided to be the 2 best teams. Now, if ties had counted as they do now, the Green Bay Packers would have won the 1932 title.
In 1935, the Lions won it all, but
the Green Bay Packers actually had an 8-4 record that year, a little bit better than Detroit in the West Division. But Detroit had a better winning percentage because of the ties. They didn't count the ties, so they gave them a little bit better winning percentage.
Coach Curly Lambeau once said, "Let's act like champions. Let's practice like champions. Let's play like champions. Let's be like champions." In 1936, his team responded, and we have that story of that season in this episode with our guest historian, who is the founder of Gridiron Greats magazine and the Green Bay Packers stockholder, Bob Swick.
Well, it's an interesting season. There were only 9 teams that played that year in the NFL. And the Packers were 11 wins, 1 loss, and 1 tie. So they had a very, very strong team.
Bob joins us with more in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pigpen, your portal to positive football history. And it is 2025. And one of our missions this year is to talk about NFL championships. You know, there is plenty of them to do. We're going to sort of forgo the Super Bowl era, as you've seen, and we're going to talk about the championship games that happened from 1933 to 1965, when they were really called the NFL championship games. And one of the teams that was very popular during this time and right into the Super Bowl era was the Green Bay Packers. And we're going to talk about their first championship tonight. And we've brought along a special guest, a historian and a founder of Gridiron Greats magazine, Bob Swick. Bob, welcome back to the Pigpen.
Darren, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Bob, this is really an exciting venture here to go to these championship games, and I feel really honored that we get somebody from your neck of the woods that's a collector, a historian, and a Green Bay Packers fan, and you're one of the own some stock in the Packers too.
Correct.
So
Yeah, the Packers to me just represent something great in sports and great in football. Being a publicly owned team, a team in a small town of America, and having 13 different championships over the years, including the Super Bowl era, is an incredible accomplishment. And the 1936 season, the 1936 Packers were a pretty unique team, to say the least.
yeah, they most definitely were. And just to touch on something, I was pondering a couple weeks ago before the Super Bowl. Of course, I'm a Pennsylvanian, and I was wondering, what state has the most National Football League championships? So I was kind of surprised that Wisconsin is leading the NFL with those 13 championships, the Packers that you mentioned. So
Correct. They have won the most championships in the NFL history. And again, it's tough to win in the NFL, especially today, as we both know. So it is a great accomplishment for the team, and it says something about having a team that has been deep seated into the community, deep seated into the NFL for so many years, to be victorious 13 different occasions in roughly 100 plus years of playing football.
yeah, so this 1936 season, this is the fourth season that the NFL had a championship game. They started in 1933. And what can you tell us about the 1936 season and how the Packers fit into it?
Well, it's an interesting season. There were only 9 teams that played that year in the NFL. And the Packers were 11 wins, 1 loss, and 1 tie. So they had a very, very strong team. The team itself, believe it or not, had 4 future Hall of Famers on it. And that really, to me, says that this is how special that team was, being a great both offensive and defensive team when offense was very limited, to say the least, back then. They had Arnie Herber, who was their quarterback, great Hall of Fame player. The incredible Don Hutson, who was an end beyond comparison with his play. They had Clark Hinkle, and they also had Johnny Blood. And Johnny Blood, a well-known, quote unquote, notorious player, even though he was probably one of the nicest guys in the world once you met him, laid everything on the line for the team in every game. It's interesting in that season, the only game they lost was to the arch rival Chicago Bears in the second week, and they got smotched 30-3. And the only game they tied that season, believe it or not, was the last game of the year, which I do believe was played in very bad weather, to a 0-0 tie with the Chicago Cardinals. So it's interesting that the rest of the time of that year, they were just winning left and right. They had a great team. They had a very strong offense. They scored a lot of points. Their defense was very strong. They didn't give up a lot of points, and they actually, in the championship game, played the Boston Redskins at the time. And the Redskins had Cliff Battles on the team, and he was their star player. But Boston had a record of 7 wins and 6 losses. And the Packers actually defeated the Redskins once during the season by a score of 31-2, believe it or not. They gave up a late game safety for the 2 points against the Redskins there. So going into this season, Green Bay by far and wide was the best team in the NFL. And the Eastern Division was a very, very weak division at that time. And the Redskins did win with a 7 victory and 6 loss season of the 13 games they played. So they were not that strong of a team. And again, in the championship game, the Packers obviously won, and the Redskins really couldn't do much during that game. And I believe the score was 21-6. It was close in the first half. It was 7-6 the first half, and then the Packers scored 2 touchdowns shutting out the Redskins for the rest of the game, and the rest is history. So it was a very, very strong team given the 9-team league, and also given that the Packers were in their early days, but yet we're still coached by the one and only Curly Lambeau, of which Lambeau Field is named after today. He was their coach for many years, and he always, I read some reports saying that was one of the best teams he ever coached for the Packers. So that's an interesting oversight.
He's an interesting character because he's from the Green Bay area.
Correct.
You have a hometown boy
Yeah.
coaching the team to a championship. That's got to be, phenomenal. I don't know if that's ever happens very often in National Football League history.
It really didn't. And the other big thing that season, from some research I did on it, was that they set a record for season ticket sales at that time. They sold over 1,200 season tickets, believe it or not. So that was a big help for the team because they needed to be financed and they needed money. And you could actually buy a season pass, and I believe they had 6 home games at the time. You could buy a season's pass for as low as $4.
Wow.
For the $1 seats or whatever. So that's not bad. $4 today at Green Bay will not buy you much of anything at all.
What do you get, like a third of a beer or something for $4?
I was going to say you could even probably can't buy a bottle of water now for $4 there. But anyways, their place in football history there, they were destined to win that championship game in that season. I really think the Redskins were just overwhelmed in the game.
Yeah, and by all appearances, you talked about the standings. The 9 teams were broke up. There was 5 teams in the East, and that was the Redskins came in first now with that 7-6 record, like you said. The Pittsburgh Pirates, who became the Steelers, were a 500 club. Everybody else was below 500.
Right.
But in the West, where the Packers were, the Bears and the Lions had very respectable records. I'm showing 9-3 and 8-4 respectively.
Right.
And the Cardinals trail a little bit behind with a 3-8 record, 3-8-1 record. So, that was a pretty competitive division that they were in that Western division, and they, dominated it and, won by over 2 games.
And again, you got to remember back then, the NFL had 3 very, very strong franchises and strong teams in the Bears, the Packers, and the Lions. And again, the Lions, although they peaked in the 50s, and then became a non-team almost for many years until the past few seasons, they were always 3 of the strongest teams. Then you had the Giants come in from the East, who started to become a very strong team as the years went on. So the balance of power was definitely in the West, if you want to call it the West. I call it more of the Midwest of those 3 teams in the NFL during the 1930s, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point to make. And you talked about some of these some of the players, the Hall of Famers that were on the Packers that year, and 2 of them ended up being the leaders in 1936 season. With Erber was the leading passer in the league.
Right.
And this is going to be kind of laughable by today's numbers, but think about this, 90 some years ago, he threw for 1,239 yards to lead the NFL in passing, and Don Hutson led the NFL in receiving yards with 536 yards. So those guys were pretty productive tandem for passing, especially back in that era.
Right. And again, it was not the passing era that we know today. It was just the beginnings of the passing game in the 1930s, in my opinion. And they were a great duo. I mean, they read each other well, and they worked together, and they scored a lot of touchdowns and gained a lot of yards, and that's how you win games. Simple.
Yeah, just looking at the stats, them against the Packers that year against their opposition. Rushing, the Packers had 1,664 yards rushing. They gave up 1,494, so it was a little over 160 some yards that difference. So not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but passing, they were almost even. They were a very balanced team. They were over 1,600 yards in passing offense also. where their opposition only was less than 1,200 is all they gave up in passing. So that's where they made their hay
Right.
over their
Right.
opposition, was in that having the advantage in a passing game with Herber and Don Hutson.
Exactly. Exactly. And again, to gain that many yards in that season, does provide more points. That's all I can say. You got to score, and if you can gain yardage and you get down to the end zone, you're in great shape. That's what it's all about.
And maybe the most surprising fact, and this probably astonished football fans back in the 1930s, is their touchdown ratio. They had 38 touchdowns that year. 17 of those were passes.
Right.
Which
I was going to say it was almost half the touchdowns came from passing.
17 passing touchdowns, 11 rushing touchdowns. So somebody was going crazy saying, "Oh my gosh, this passing game maybe this is kind of a good thing."
Right.
And I really think that Herber and especially Don Hutson definitely reestablished a position. He took the end position and turned it to what we know as wide receiver. I really believe that. And I think Herber had a lot to do with promoting the quarterback position from, they're playing going from the single wing to the T formation.
Right.
And that the quarterback position wasn't really known for the passing. You halfbacks and tailbacks, the majority of passing back then. But I think he really took the bull by the horns and sort of set a standard.
Oh, definitely. He definitely did. And I think he also realized, and I think Lambeau understood the value of the passing game. And I think he really understood that he could win more games with a good passing game. He could win more games with having that end position actually be a functional position that can move, was agile, that can get down the field, that can catch the ball, so on and so forth. So that opened up the entire concept of a passing offense to me, which, was in its very beginnings there, and to expand it as the years went on. And I kind of always felt the Packers, to me, you look at their quarterbacks over the years, you look at Herbert, you look at Bart Starr, you look at Favre, you look at Rodgers. I mean, they've always had good passing game. I mean, there were several years, they were in limbo, so on and so forth, like the 50s, the 70s, early 80s. So, but they've always seen the value of a good quarterback. And I think that's important. And today it's a different story. I can't comment on the game on 2025 now, but back then and through the 60s, you're seeing the evolution of passing, and you're seeing the evolution of how that can be your offense to a large degree, as compared to a T formation or bump and grind 2 yards on a carry type of situation.
Yeah, and I guess some other points. So you pointed out, there was 4 Hall of Famers on that team, and some people may sit there and say, "Okay, ho hum, 4 Hall of Famers." We got to remember, this is the single platoon era.
Right.
This isn't 35, 36 starters with special teams. This is 11 guys, and 4 of the 11 are in the Hall of Fame. That is a pretty lofty number that I don't think too many teams can claim that they have that for one season.
Exactly. To me, it really says a lot about that team, and says how good that team was for them to get those picks as the years went on, as far as the Hall of Fame is concerned. And again, it's important to realize, we're studying the game that was 90 some odd years ago, almost 90 years ago. And we have to rely on written word and articles and so on and so forth. And it's fascinating to read the sports articles at the time, especially in Green Bay, because Green Bay loved the Packers, and they wrote about them year round. I mean, it was inevitable. You never did not know what was going on with the Packers if you were in Green Bay, even during the off season. So writing about what they had as a team that year, and seeing the articles of how good those 4 players were, was very, very impressive to me, because the sports writers at that time, the few that covered the team, did see the special nature of those guys on that team. They saw their ability, they saw how good they were, and they reported it as such, which was nice to read and nice to see.
Yeah, I'll bet. And we can't fail to mention here that one of the other Hall of Famers, we talked about Erber and Hutson, Clark Hinkle was the leading rusher on the
Right.
team at fullback, 476 yards and 5 TDs from the fullback position. So he was a big contributor too to the offense.
Exactly. Exactly. He really did a lot for the offense, and he really got them going and and again, they had a passing game and they had a running game. And that was very unique for a team in the NFL in that time to have it. So I think that's another big reason why they ended up winning that championship for that year.
Yeah, and I guess the more I think about it, I don't know if I've ever seen a team that balanced with,
Right,
almost
right.
to the number, within 50 yards of each other for a
Yeah.
season and win a championship to be that balanced. That's pretty phenomenal. It
I,
might be an interesting study I might have to do to see if anybody else got that close, because that's pretty cool.
yeah. And again, like I said, there was a balanced team. It had the offense, it had the passing game, had the running game, and they had a good defense at the same time. And you couldn't ask for anything more than that. And they were truly a unique part of NFL history and a unique part of the Green Bay history of championships, being one of the 13 that they've won over the years. I want to show something as a tie-in here. Uh,
Sure.
Back in 1933, you could buy matchbooks that had players on them. Okay.
Hmm.
And this is a 1933. I believe this is the Clark Hinkle matchbook. And it's basically, there's no matches in it, but it was preserved over the years. I had this
Wow,
in my Packers collection. And also another
that's
player who
cool.
played for the team was Bob. I think his last name was pronounced Monet. And I have his matchbook also from
Wow, that's very cool.
1933. I was trying to find period pieces. I don't, like I was telling you beforehand, I don't have a lot of original stuff from the 30s, but I know I have my matchbooks and my matchbook cover collection. And I do have, this was printed many years later. This was the actual postcard team photo from 1936.
Wow.
And it's
Love those
interesting.
uniforms.
Yeah. And this was a reprint set of the championship years that they did in the early 1990s. But I knew they had pictures of all the championship teams in it, so I thought I would show that also. But
Yeah, we appreciate that. That's really cool stuff.
the uniforms are so to me cool looking, because they were so basic. Look at the way the numbers are on the jerseys, and the rigid nature of the team photo. I always enjoyed looking at those and collecting them over the years. But
It's almost like you're looking at a picture frame, because the sleeves being the lighter
yeah,
color and the trim, it's almost frames everything in for the number, being the sort of the center of the piece. It's kind of cool.
exactly. And I went on YouTube also, seeing there were a few. I think there were 3 or 4 like 30-second cuts. Somehow somebody was able to save some sort of film. So they showed it. And to see, a field that, a lot of people today wouldn't even understand that's a football field that they're playing on, type of thing. And the way the players look and so on and so forth. It's just fascinating to see the history of that.
It
And
looks sometimes they look more like a mud wrestling fit
exactly.
there than
I was just going to say that, where they
yeah,
didn't cancel games when you had snow on the ground or rain or anything else. You just played through, and that was it.
right. Wow. That is some great stuff. And speaking of great stuff, Bob, you have a great periodical that you publish,
Thank
and
you.
you have, and so maybe you could tell us a little bit about the magazine.
Yeah, we publish Gridiron Greats magazine on a quarterly basis. It's a magazine, roughly 44 to 48 pages each issue, and we look at different topics in football history and memorabilia, collecting, We feature collections. We feature pieces of memorabilia, things that football card and memorabilia collectors collect. We feature a lot of stories. Lately, unfortunately, I've been writing a lot of stories on players who passed, which is inevitable. But we try to look at a lot of different areas of football cards and football collecting, football memorabilia, and football history, and we're trying to preserve the name of football history and preserve football collecting and memorabilia to truly understand the history of the game. Because sadly, a lot of people think that the NFL started in 1970, and they don't understand the rich history, especially of the game pre-World War II, including the 1910s, the 1920s, 1930s, so on and so forth. And to find material from those years becomes more and more difficult as each passing year goes by, and we want to preserve it. We want to keep it alive and keep the name alive, and we want to give a shout out to a lot of players who never got recognition over the years and who have been left behind in a lot of cases with regards to medical problems, medical issues, things of that nature, so on and so forth. We've been publishing since 2009. 2008. I took over from the original owner of Gridiron Greats magazine. He published issues number 1 to 22. We took over at issue 23, and our last issue was 87. So we've been doing this for a long time, 16 years, and we're still going strong. And hopefully I got a few more years I can get it out. So
But Bob, why don't you share with and I'm sure you will, we're counting on you doing that because we enjoy the magazine. But why don't you share with folks if they want to subscribe to the magazine to get a copy themselves?
Just check our website out. It's simple, gridirongreatsmagazine.com. Has all the information you need if you want to become a new subscriber. We do have a limited amount of back issues available. If you see something that you like and just want to buy that issue, you can do that also. But please, by all means, if you're not a subscriber to Gridiron Greats magazine, as I say in our podcast, what are you waiting for? Check out our website, gridirongreatsmagazine.com.
Yeah, I highly recommend it, folks. And you've got really a great and talented group of contributors. Some great authors in there. Some folks who have been on this show. Maybe you could you give some shout outs to some of the people that contribute.
Yeah, we have San Francisco 49er historian Martin Jacobs, who writes for us. He was elected a super fan about 20 years ago by the 49ers and by Visa. We also have Jeff Payne, who we both know well, who's done several pieces. We have Harv Aronson, who writes about Pittsburgh-related sports and things of early NFL. We have Greg Trantner, who has written extensively about bills and other different subject matters for the magazine. Greg and I go back a long time. I helped him pick up when he was actively collecting in the 1980s a Bills preseason program that was played in New Haven, Connecticut at Hill House High School, believe it or not. And I happened to have a copy of it, and he was looking for it. And so we exchanged, that was our first communication, and we stayed in touch for many, many years. We also have arena football historian Gary Cobb, who writes about the arena football, either memorabilia or about the league itself in each issue. We also have John Spano, who writes from a column from behind the table, dealer's perspective. John was one of the former owners of MSB Sports Cards and BST Auctions for many years. He writes for us. We also have Dr. Richard Barrett, who writes for us. He writes a column from the 1990s perspective of all the different football card sets from the 90s. We also have Barry Blair, who's an author who writes on occasion. He likes covering the National Sports Collectors Convention, wherever it's being held. We have John Verparian, who writes about New York-based teams and players. So we have quite a few people writing. We have my co-host Joe Squires writes about all things Red Grange and his Seattle Seahawks on occasion. So we got a good bunch of writers. I have to bless my wife for doing the layout and the design work of the magazine. It's a thankless position that she does eloquently, and been doing it for many years now. And
Does a great job.
thanks. And Jared Kraus, who designs our front covers, and he does a lot of drawings for us, is also invaluable with his designs. And we get a lot of compliments on our covers because they're cool. I mean, they're nice to look at. They're appealing.
Yeah.
They're nice to see. You can frame them if you want to. You just
Yeah, this isn't, folks, this is a really nice cover and well put together magazine, very professionally done, and with good stock paper, and
right.
it's very, very good. A nice color, pop on the occasion, when the colors are in there, and when you want to see the detail of something black and white, you can see that too, because you use that nice heavy paper.
Exactly. And the one thing we did, we brought the magazine up to a different level because we went to all color printing on the inside. Our early issues we did were black and white. And then I finally made a decision. We got to show this stuff in color. It doesn't do anyone any good seeing a black and white of a full color card or whatever, or a program or anything like that. So we made the decision early on that we were going to convert to all color inside and a true full 4-color front cover, to add to the what I like to call the beauty of the magazine, and an appealing part of the magazine for people who read it.
Speaking on behalf of the rest of your subscribers, we appreciate the color. We appreciate the talented staff, that including yourself, that write and tell about football history and the variety of it. Yeah, and the work that your wife and your artist does too, because that's a phenomenal job that you all do, and you come together collectively to make a great magazine and Gridiron Greats.
Thank you, and we do it for the love of the hobby. Believe me, I'm not retiring off of the production of the magazine in any way, shape, or form.
I'll bet.
I just wanted to, like I said, I want to keep it going as long as I can to try to, again, preserve the history of the game, the history of memorabilia, so on and so forth. And I think it's important, and I appreciate what you've been doing. Shout out to you, because you are preserving the game, the history, the pieces of the game, the players, the teams, so on and so forth. Your books provided that also. You're doing a great job also. And again, we do thankless jobs, but we do it because we enjoy it. And that's what a hobby is about. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, so, appreciate the kind words.
That's true. I want to give you a shout out too, because, again, we don't have ESPN advertising with us. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, we're one-on-one here, that type of thing. So
exactly,
it's important.
But why don't you tell us a little bit? Okay, you alluded to it a little bit, that you and Joe Squires, you have your podcast on sports history network. Tell us a little bit about what's going on with that, and maybe some episodes you got coming up.
We started the podcast back in it's so weird for me to say, in the tens. We started doing it on one particular network that we were involved with. And then we left that network and we did it on our own for several years. We try to do 2 shows a month. We average probably 20 to 25 shows a year. We recently joined Sports History Network, as you're on, and we're both on, which has been a real big advantage for us. I really see a lot of people listening to the podcast now. We have a lot of different opportunities we didn't have before. We're now visual. Before we were a true old-fashioned podcast where we just talked on the phone, and then we went to video, and now with the video we can actually show the pieces of memorabilia and stuff we have, and it's just a whole new ball game now having that. And we've had a lot of different guests over the years. We've had Greg on the show. We had Gary Cobb. Joe Ziemba has been on talking about his books and talking about the Cardinals. We've had a lot of different people. You were on it at one time. So we try to get collectors. We like to get football writers, We like to get people involved in the game, some known, some not as well known. We recently had E. Blake Moore, the former Packer player, on, and he talked about his book. And that was a heck of a story for me, because I teach part-time online. I've been doing that for many, many years now. I've taught part-time for 43 years. I'm still teaching now. I teach for the University of Cincinnati in their online program.
Nice.
And I had a student, and she was reading my bio, and she said, Gridiron Greats magazine. She said, I got to tell my boss about that magazine. I said, well, who's your boss? So she said, well, he played for the Packers, E. Blake Moore. I said, what? And so I'm looking at the name, vaguely familiar to me. And I look it up in my media guides, and he played for the Bengals. And then when Forrest Gregg went over to the Packers, he picked him up over to get him to the Packers. He played 2 seasons for the Packers. A self-made man, real cool story. So we had him on, and he sent me his book he wrote quite a few years ago on his life story, and playing for the Bengals and playing for the Packers. What a story. It was incredible. So he was our first former player we actually had on the show, which was a big deal for us. So that's pretty cool. So we try to, get people of collecting memorabilia backgrounds, feature and talk about their collections, football writers, so on and so forth. And we do. Now, we could also say we had an ex-player on the show, so we've had the full circle, let's say, of different people involved in the hobby and in the game itself, which I think is important to hear their stories.
Yeah, there's nothing better when you get a bunch of people involved talking football, preserving the game, preserving some of the legacies of these legends that came before us, that made the NFL and college football what it is today because of their sacrifice and of their bodies and their hard work, and really to make the game so popular. So
exactly. And I hate to say this, but I'll take watching old games any day over watching today's game. So, that's just the way I am. I'm old school. I'm stuck in a time warp, let's say. I haven't progressed out of the 60s or 70s for a long time.
Nothing wrong with that. With a lot of things that are going on in the world, so it's not a bad thing to do. But Bob, we really appreciate you coming on here and sharing this Packers history, their first championship season, and we're going to be doing this. We've got 30 some years of this, and there's a lot of Packers in there, so we're hoping that you'll be able to come on again and talk about another season of the Packers.
I plan on being back. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. It was it's the fastest 30 minutes in broadcasting. That's what I say. We talk for hours on end about this stuff.
Absolutely. And folks, if you're driving and you couldn't write down the information that Bob shared with his magazine and his podcast, go into the show notes of either the YouTube channel or the podcast. We'll get you links to get connected with Bob and the rest of the gang over at Gridiron Greats. Bob Swick, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on it.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.